Right, so the Natwest share collapse is all the fault of the nefarious Farage and his Coutts calamity, which is such a massive non-story I've thus far resolved to not pass comment on it. My regular viewers might think, well, is Damo ever going to come and have a chat about Nigel and what he's been getting on with his banking? I really didn't want to, if I'm honest. I really think there's more important things to cover, but there's an angle to this that I do want to touch on. Now, he lost his bank account with his posh bank. Boo-hoo. Welcome to the real world. Natwest offered Farage another account. They own Coutts, but he didn't want to slum it with the rest of us. His problem. But it has just blown up, this story, and actually it might all come down, and this is the point that I want to come to a rich man gambling and hedging the bets in his own favour and being the founder and owner of the media outlet pushing this story the hardest. Did he use his media influence to help him financially make millions? Well, when we think about dodgy media, many of us might automatically latch onto the likes of the traditional press barons, as they're called, influencing news stories for power's sake, for gaining influence with politicians. We think of the likes of Rupert Murdoch, don't we, and his Scum and his Times newspaper outlets here, not to mention Talk TV and Talk Radio, plus his other outlets abroad. And there's Lord Rothermere of the Daily Fail, the Torygraph and the Barclay brothers, press barons. They've been around for decades. We've seen their type. We know they are driven by supporting right-wing politics. We know they have far too much influence here in the traditional mainstream news reporting so many of us still rely on. But what about other right-wing outlets? Let's have a butchers at GB News. Gbeebies, so called because, my God, do they spit the dummy and chuck the toys out of the pram when they stuff up or seem to, or get held to account for some of the nonsense they might peddle. Well, they were founded by a hedge funder, or part founded by a hedge funder, a chap called Sir Paul Marshall, knighted in the 2016 Birthday Honours List for services to education and philanthropy, no less, in case you wondered. He was formerly a major Lib Dem donor, back when they had enough MPs to warrant the influence, but after they imploded in 2015, he left the party, allegedly citing its position over the EU, Brexiteer type as he was. Well, you can argue with the party reduced to barely being able to fill a minibus at that point, he could no longer buy in much influence there, if you're a cynical type of thinker, as you know that I am. He went to funding the Tories instead. It's a good job that knighthood for education came in 2016, because after putting £10 million of his own money into getting GB News off the ground, he might not have warranted it after given the guff the channel pushes, and thus we come to the here and now, and a question mark now sitting above GB News's editorial decision, their decision-making potentially, having anything to do with Marshall via his hedge fund, Marshall Wace, which makes millions betting on all sorts, and made millions betting on Natwest shares taking a nosedive. So how have we got to this point? Well, the fallout from Farage losing his coveted posh person's bank account and Farage being a GB News presenter gave him carte blanche to gob off about how wronged he's been by the bank. Now, there's been one story on one hand that Farage no longer has enough cash in Coutts to keep his account there. You need to be in a position to be able to borrow a minimum of £1 million to hold a Coutts account, or have at least £3 million deposited there, for the record. But there's been another story where Farage's general conduct and views have led the bank to not want to be associated with him. Apparently, the CEO of Natwest, Dame Alison Rose, had drawn up a dossier on him and admitted to it, giving Farage opportunity to have a field day, saying he's being targeted, cancel culture. Sunak comes out in agreement with him, of course. What an awful person Alison Rose is. The hypocrisy is strong with that one. The only strong thing about him, it certainly isn't his leadership. Starmer gets compared to Farage in an interview with Nicky Campbell. That's just an aside, but no less entertaining, if only for the look on Starmer's face. Do go and have a look at that one. Rose ended up resigning in disgrace over her chosen method of conduct, as does the CEO of Coutts, a guy called Peter Flavelle, and trouble at the top of a big bank always makes investors nervous. Around £1 billion, or just shy of £1 billion, got wiped off the value of Natwest shares over this debacle. Now, to my mind, if Natwest finds Farage an unsavoury character, if they don't want to do business with him, that ought to be up to them. If a shop refuses any of us service, per se, that's their right, isn't it? Why is not the same for the banks? Seems weird to me. But this is what has panned out. So we have this messy situation over how Natwest and Coutts have handled Farage, who it seems is someone they just didn't want to be associated with their brand. Farage has used his position on the hedge funder-funded GB News to whine about it. The right-wing media have rallied to Mr. Brexit's side. Same hedge funder funding GB News has his hedge fund bet on Natwest shares dropping, and the hedge fund makes some £5 million off the back of it. Now, £5 million to a hedge fund worth some $60 billion is a drop in the ocean. But the former Lib Dem member and donor is now an ardent member of the anti-woke brigade, apparently. And in the war on woke, helping Nigel help himself can quite easily be seen as helping his own profit margin too, but also that sense of self-satisfaction. Now, Marshall Wace itself is saying, no, this is not the case. We use a computer algorithm to decide where we invest, and it just happened to pick here. But when GB News platforms Farage, when one of the partners of Marshall Wace is a founder of GB News as well, is it not possible that behind the scenes goings on at GB News and the wider implications in financial institutions their reportings might have, they chose to let Farage bemoan his personal problems as if they were news after all? Can this not be seen to be engineering a situation that said algorithm might then hit on anyway? We cover news here. We make bets there. Can we use one to influence the other? What? Our media be used to influence the opinions of economists and other money men? Surely they would never do such a thing. When have we ever seen news influence thinking in the UK before? Said absolutely no one ever. Of course, it's feasible. The papers and those same media barons have been doing it for decades. This is just a modern iteration of that happening with computer algorithms involved. It's ironic, isn't it? Farage complains all the time about cancel culture, yet it's just netted his GB News boss, if you will, via that hedge fund, a nice little windfall. Now, I'm not saying that Natwest boss didn't make a lash up of this. She absolutely did. But the fact Farage can lose his mind, and he'll keep milking this for all he's worth because it's what he does, and force the boss of a major bank out, should worry a lot of people as to just how much clout he's been allowed to have here. Should we be surprised political party leaders have voiced support for him, in which case, arguably, they're scared of him? This is exactly the problem Ofcom have allowed to happen, to pervade, by allowing politicians to become presenters. Of course, unlike some, Farage had left politics to become a presenter. There was no overlap in his case. But his influence has nonetheless continued, with even Jacob Rees-Mogg the other day referring to him as a senior politician. He might not have ever sat in Parliament, and not for lack of trying, but he still has that regard and that influence, and it can be argued that is being allowed to be amplified by GB News through their backers potentially in order to benefit them financially. Maybe. Could it be considered insider trading? I've seen this comment come up a time or two. Runs close to that in my mind. It might not exactly be that, but it is certainly influencing the odds if there's any truth behind all of these allegations. And it is just what they are, is allegations. It is conjecture. The anti-woke sort, the people who watch Gbeebies, might consider all of this to be conspiracy theorising. Well, it could all be happy coincidence. I'm sure Sir Paul Marshall never meant to accidentally make all that money, but come on, when is it ever that? Some of us have suggested that he's been some have suggested he's been betting against Natwest, short derivatives as they call it, since April. So Farage having an on-camera aneurysm over his precious Coutts account being taken away from him and being allowed to go off on one on a supposed news channel didn't hurt his betting one iota, did it? But it may not be directly connected. It may just be that happy coincidence. Would he have been allowed to do so if Marshall was betting the other way, though? Intentionally damaging his chances? Would he have allowed Farage to spout off and damage the chances of him making some money on his shorting of Natwest shares? It makes you wonder about how much editorial influence goes on behind the scenes at GB News, doesn't it? Ultimately, we don't know. We can ponder, we can conjecture, we can't be sure that any wrongdoing has gone on, at least not at this point. Could be totally innocent, but we have become so used to people in power or positions of power being on the take in this country, it would surprise nobody if continued coverage and investigation find there to be some truth behind it all. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the vid useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. New content out daily. Meanwhile, check out this video here, because for as much as Farage's other hobby is standing on cliffs and pointing at boats, it's not something everyone gets behind. And stopping boats is something Liverpool and Edinburgh did very well recently, though not in the slightest way the way that Farage might have liked them to. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.